They found my car 3 days after I stopped answering my phone. I picked him up outside Barstow because I thought doing a good deed might balance out the year I'd been having. He was standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, backpack at his feet, and when I slowed down, he jogged up to the passenger window with this grateful smile that made me feel like I'd made the right choice. "Heading toward Flagstaff," he said. "Anywhere in that direction works." I told him I was going straight through, that he could ride the whole way if he wanted. He thanked me 3 times while getting in, set his pack between his feet, and we pulled back onto the empty highway. For the first 20 minutes, he was exactly what you'd want in a hitchhiker. Polite and quiet, asking reasonable questions about where I was from and what I did. I relaxed into it, turned up the radio a little, and let the desert roll by. The conversation shifted when he asked if I lived alone. I said yes, and he nodded like he'd already known, like he was just confirming. Then he asked if anyone knew where I was today, and the way he said it made my hands tighten on the wheel. I laughed it off, said my sister knew my route, which was a lie. He smiled and looked out the window. He started talking about roads, about how many of them cut through places where you could disappear and nobody would think to look for weeks. He said it casually, like he was making conversation about the weather. I tried to change the subject, but he kept going, describing how far you could see in every direction out here, how that visibility made people feel safe when really it just meant there was nowhere to run. I decided to drop him off at the next town, which was still 40 miles out. I mentioned it gently, said I needed to stop for gas anyway and maybe he'd have better luck catching another ride from there. He turned to look at me, and his expression hadn't changed at all, but somehow the air in the car felt different. He said that wasn't going to work for him. When I insisted, he reached into his backpack. I didn't see what he pulled out, but I felt it press against my ribs, hard and specific, and he told me to keep driving. My whole body went cold. I thought about swerving, about slamming the brakes, but we were going 70 and the fear locked me in place. He told me to take the next exit. The off-ramp led to a fire road that hadn't been maintained in years. Rocks kicked up under the car and the path narrowed until brush was scraping both sides. He directed me with one-word commands, left, right, slower, and I followed because I couldn't think of what else to do. My mind was racing, but every plan fell apart before I could act on it. We stopped in a clearing where the road ended. He told me to turn off the engine, and when I did, the silence was so complete it felt like the world had been erased. He got out and walked around to my door, opened it, and pulled me out by my arm. The ground was uneven and I stumbled, but he kept me upright with a grip that didn't allow room for resistance. There was a drop about 30 yards away, not a cliff exactly, but a steep embankment that fell into a rocky wash below. He walked me toward it, and I started begging. I told him he could take the car, take everything, that I wouldn't say anything to anyone. He didn't respond, just kept pushing me forward until we were right at the edge, and I could see how far down it went. He told me to get back in the car. I thought maybe he'd changed his mind, but when I looked at his face, I knew that wasn't it. He walked me back and put me in the driver's seat. Then he leaned in and released the parking brake. I realized what he was going to do and tried to jump out, but he shoved me back in and slammed the door. The car started rolling backward. I grabbed for the brake pedal, but my foot slipped, and by the time I found it, we were already moving too fast. I looked up and saw him standing there watching, hands in his pockets like he had all the time in the world. The back wheels went over first, and then the whole car tipped. And the last thing I remember thinking was how quiet it was. Just the crunch of metal and my own voice filling up the space inside. They found my car 3 days later. I wasn't in it. I woke up in the wash with bones I couldn't use, and a thirst that made me forget my own name. It took me 6 hours to drag myself close enough to the road that someone finally saw me. I still can't close my eyes without feeling that backward roll. That moment when the ground disappeared and everything went weightless. He's still out there. I know he is. And he's still standing on some empty highway, waiting for the next person who thinks they're helping. The dirt in my mouth tastes like pennies and clay. I was driving through Nevada at 2 in the morning when I saw him limping on the side of Route 50. One arm was wrapped around his ribs, and he was barely moving forward, and when my headlights hit him, he turned with this desperate look that made me pull over without thinking. He came to the window breathing hard, Said he'd been in an accident a mile back, that his car had gone off the road and he needed to get to a hospital. I told him to get in. He was holding his side like something was broken, and there was dirt all over his clothes, smeared on his face and hands. He thanked me, said he didn't know how long he'd been walking. I asked if he wanted me to call an ambulance, but he said no, that he just needed a ride to the next town. His voice was steady despite the pain, and I believed him completely. We drove for about 10 minutes before he asked me to pull over. He said he was going to be sick, that he needed air. I stopped on the shoulder and he got out, walked a few steps into the scrub, and doubled over. I waited in the car with the engine running, watching him in the mirror. He stayed bent for a long time. Then he straightened up and walked back, but he went to the trunk instead of the passenger door. I didn't understand what was happening until he opened my door with a tire iron in his hand. He told me to get out, and the way he was standing now, there was nothing wrong with his ribs. Nothing broken at all. I started to argue, and he swung the tire iron into the side of the car, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet. I got out. He walked me away from the road, into the desert where the ground was hard and colorless. I kept waiting for a car to come by, for headlights to appear in the distance, but the highway stayed empty. He told me to stop when we were far enough that I couldn't see the road anymore, just darkness in every direction and the shape of mountains against the sky. There was a shovel on the ground. I don't know how it got there, if he'd planted it earlier, or if I'd just missed it in the dark, but he pointed at it and told me to pick it up. When I didn't move, he raised the tire iron and I grabbed the shovel, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. He told me to start digging. I said I wouldn't. I said he could do whatever he wanted, but I wasn't going to help him. He hit me in the knee with the tire iron and I went down, the pain so bright and sudden I couldn't breathe. He waited for me to stop gasping and then told me again, "Start digging." I dug. The ground was harder than it looked, and every swing of the shovel sent vibrations up my arms. He stood a few feet away, watching, and occasionally he'd tell me to go deeper or wider. I kept thinking someone would come, that this couldn't actually be happening, but the only sound was the scrape of metal on rock and my own breathing getting faster and more ragged. It took over an hour. My hands blistered, and then the blisters opened and I could feel the wetness on the handle. He didn't let me stop. When I slowed down, he'd step closer and I'd force myself to keep going, because stopping meant facing what came next, and I wasn't ready for that. The hole got deeper, past my ankles, then my knees, and I realized I was standing in it, digging myself down. When it was deep enough that I couldn't climb out without help, he told me to stop. I looked up at him, and he was just a silhouette against the stars. I asked him why he was doing this, what I'd done, and he said nothing. He didn't owe me an explanation. He just needed me gone. He told me to lie down. I didn't. I tried to pull myself out of the hole, but the walls crumbled under my hands, and he stepped on my fingers with his boot, pressing down until I let go. I fell back into the dirt, and he picked up the shovel. I started screaming then, screaming for help even though there was nobody, screaming until my throat closed up and I couldn't make sound anymore. The first shovelful of dirt hit my chest. The second covered my legs. I tried to shield my face, but he just kept going, methodical and patient, and the weight started building. I couldn't move my legs anymore, then I couldn't move my arms. The dirt filled in around me and pressed down, and I turned my head to keep my mouth clear, but it didn't matter because he wasn't stopping. It covered my face. I held my breath, but the pressure kept increasing and I couldn't expand my lungs against it. I couldn't move anything. I was trapped in the dark with the taste of earth flooding my senses and the panic turning my thoughts into white noise. I don't know how long I was under before everything went away. I woke up because someone was digging. A ranger found my car on the roadside the next morning and tracked footprints into the desert. He said later that he almost missed the disturbed ground, that if the sun hadn't been at the right angle, he would have walked right past. They pulled me out still breathing somehow, dirt in my lungs and my brain swollen from lack of air. I couldn't speak for 3 days. I still feel it sometimes, that weight on my chest, and I wake up clawing at nothing, trying to make space where there isn't any. He said he knew a faster way and I believed him. I picked her up outside of Elko because she was a woman, and that felt safer somehow. She was maybe 50, tired looking, with a canvas bag and a sun hat. And when I stopped, she thanked me like I'd saved her life. She said she was trying to get to Ely, that she'd been waiting 2 hours and nobody else had slowed down. I told her I was heading that direction anyway and she could ride along. For the first hour, she was pleasant company. She asked about my job, my family, where I was coming from. I told her about the conference in Salt Lake City, how I was driving back to California and taking the scenic route because I had time. She nodded along and made appropriate comments, and I felt good about stopping, like I'd done something decent in a world that didn't always reward decency. Then she mentioned the shortcut. She said if I took Highway 93 down and then cut east on a county road, I could shave 90 minutes off my drive. I'd never heard of the route, but she described it confidently, said she'd driven it dozens of times and it was paved the whole way. I was already tired of being in the car, and the idea of getting home earlier sounded perfect. So when we reached the turnoff, I took it. The road started out fine, 2 lanes and decent asphalt, but after 20 miles it narrowed and the pavement got rough. I mentioned it, and she said it got better up ahead, that this was just a bad patch. I trusted her because I didn't have a reason not to. Another 10 miles and the asphalt ended completely, turning to graded dirt that rattled my car and kicked up dust that covered the windshield. I said maybe we should turn back. She said we were past the point where that made sense, that backtracking would take longer than just pushing through. I checked my phone and there was no signal. The GPS had lost satellite connection miles ago and the map just showed a blank grid. I asked her how much further and she said maybe another hour, that the road would improve soon. It didn't improve. It got worse. The grading disappeared and we were driving on ruts and rocks, my suspension bottoming out every few minutes. The landscape had changed too, flatter and more barren, nothing but sand and low scrub in every direction. I hadn't seen another car since we turned off the highway. I started to feel the first edges of real worry. I asked her if she was sure this was right. She said yes, that she'd done this drive 100 times. But when I glanced over at her, her expression didn't match her words. She was staring straight ahead with this focused intensity that didn't look like someone giving directions. It looked like someone waiting for something to happen. The road forked, and she told me to go left. I did, and 5 minutes later it forked again, and she said right. Then left again. I realized I'd lost track of which direction we were even heading. The sun was directly overhead, and there were no landmarks, just endless flat desert that looked identical in every direction. I asked her to check the map in my glove box, and she said she didn't need to, that she knew where we were. Then the car started overheating. The temperature gauge climbed into the red, and steam began leaking from under the hood. I had to stop. I pulled over and turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was total. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic, just heat and stillness and the ticking of cooling metal. She got out. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she needed to stretch her legs. I popped the hood and looked at the engine, but I don't know anything about cars, and all I could see was steam and heat. When I turned around, she was walking away, heading into the desert with her bag over her shoulder. I called after her. She didn't stop. I yelled and started following, but she moved faster than I expected, and the heat made it hard to keep pace. I chased her for maybe 200 yards before I realized how far I'd gone from the car. When I turned back, I couldn't see it anymore. Everything looked the same, just flat beige earth and pale sky, and I couldn't tell which direction I'd come from. I tried to retrace my steps, but there were no footprints in the hard pan. I walked for 10 minutes and didn't find the car. I walked for 20 and started panicking. I screamed her name, screamed for help, but my voice disappeared into the emptiness without even an echo. The sun was crushing and I had no water, no hat, nothing but the clothes I was wearing. I kept walking because stopping felt like surrender. I walked until my legs shook and my vision started tunneling. I walked until I couldn't remember why I was walking or where I'd been trying to go. The heat did something to my thoughts, made them slippery and disconnected. I saw the car 3 times, but when I got close, it turned into rocks or shadows. I don't know how long I was out there before the ranger found me. They said it was 16 hours. They said I was 8 miles from where my car had been, walking in circles, and my core temperature was high enough that I should have been gone. They asked about the woman, and I described her. But when they checked, there was no canvas bag in my car, no second set of prints around it, They never found her. They said the road I'd taken didn't go anywhere, that it was an old mining track that had been closed for 30 years. They said no local would ever recommend it, and nobody could have driven it 100 times because it barely existed. But I didn't imagine her. I couldn't have. She knew exactly where we were going, and she got there wherever there was. I just wasn't supposed to make it back.